My final defense to the criminal court. Bismihi subhanahu. This is a defense against the 12 pages regarding my character from the 60-page-long accusatory decision reached by the court. The matters that have been raised in the decision have been responded to decisively in my defense speech, which you have on records. I present to you my 19-page-long petition and my 29-page final defense in response to the baseless and fearful indictment which has been labeled as the accusation. Both of these defenses reject and refute decisively all the points of rebuke and primary accusations outlined in the indictment by the interrogation judges. I will explain in 5 principles the basis of this indictment, the source of confusion of those making these accusations, and the references to the misquotations they have used. The first, by using as a pretext 15 passages out of 2 or 3 parts from among the 120 parts of the Risale-i Nur, it is accusing the Risale-i Nur of opposing the principles of government, being against the regime, and attempting to disrupt public security. In reply to such a baseless claim, I say this: civilization is the common property of all of Europe, and the government of the Republic has accepted certain laws of that civilization only due to the conditions of the time. How is it that my scholarly defense, which is on behalf of the truths of the Qur'an and is against the harmful aspects of this civilization, not its beneficial ones, ever be labeled as opposing the principles of government, its regime, and the revolutions of the government? Would the government of the Republic condescend itself to act as a defense lawyer to the harmful elements of European civilization? Was it the laws against Islam in that defective civilization the main objective which the governments had pursued for so long? How can the act of defending the truths of the Qur'an in a scholarly manner be compared with the defective parts of the laws of this civilization and be considered as opposition to the government? How can my 30 years of scholarly defense against the objections and assaults by European philosophers regarding the sacred truths of the ayah, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ فَلِأُمِّهِ السُّدُسُ يَا أَيُّهَا النَّبِيُّ قُلْ لِأَزْوَاجِكَ فَانكِحُوا مَا تَابَ لَكُمْ إِلَى آخِرِ, be considered as carrying intent to oppose the revolutions, principles, and regimes of the government, when throughout the past 1300 years the same definitive ayah of the all-wise Qur'an has had millions of tafsirs, commentaries written, and which can be found across all libraries today. To do so is such an open grudge and such a baseless suspicion that, if it had not been raised in this court of justice, I would not have deemed it worthy of responding to it in my defense. How is it that my scholarly defense against unbelievers who spread the seeds of atheism, cause conflict and corruption on account of the atheistic committees of Europe, and by means of the Greek and Armenian political societies, be deemed as opposing the government? And for what reason is it being interpreted as attacking the government? With what fairness is the government attributed with such unbelief and is associated with such accusations, while the strongest principles of the government of the Republic are against such unbelievers? How can atheism be attributed to certain principles of the Republic? How is it possible to interpret my victorious scholarly defense of 20 years against such atheists for the sake of this country, nation, and governments, and call it using religion as an instrument of politics and making provocations against government? What fairness will ever accept this? What conscience will allow this? Yes, I am declaring not only to this court, but to the whole world. I have defended and will continue to defend the sacred truths of belief against European philosophers, especially atheist philosophers and those who use politics as an instrument of atheism and who spiritually disrupt public order. I know the government of the Republic to be an Islamic government, which has recognized certain civil laws according to the prevailing practices of the times as not allowing any opportunity for currents of atheism that are harmful to this country and nation. In reply to the indictment which has been presented as an accusation, I say not to the interrogators who have done their duty, but to the unbelieving tyrants who use the interrogators to voice their suspicion and intrigue. You are accusing me of making religion an instrument of politics. This has been proven with 100 decisive proofs that the accusation is an open slander. It is baseless and unfounded. In response to this serious slander, I am accusing you of making politics an instrument of atheism. There was one time a quick-witted sultan who used to oppress many of his subjects with the intention of serving justice. An investigative scholar told him, "O ruler, you are oppressing your subjects under the label of justice, for your polemical and quick-witted view collects the various faults of a person, spread across time, and imagines them to be present all at once. You are delivering extreme penalties to its perpetrators. Moreover, with your polemical and contriving view, you are gathering together the faults that are committed by separate people in one tribe. And to that degree, you harbor a rancor and rage against each individual of that tribe, unfairly striking all of them. Yes, if you released in one day the saliva you release in a year, you will drown in it. If a few people applied the bitter medicines such as quinine sulfate, which you have applied across multiple time ranges, and applied it all at once, it could kill all of them. In just the same way, it is necessary to hide faults that appear only occasionally, since they are to be found in between good attributes. Through your contriving view, without considering the good characteristics that eliminate the bad, you are accumulating those various faults and dealing your subjects with heavy punishments. That sultan was saved from tyranny as a result of the warnings by that scholar. A coward force wants to deliberately imprison me. It is my feeling that they are trying to find any pretext and resort to any means possible to accuse and sentence me with excuses stranger than which the wolf finds for the sheep. For example, they have been repeating this following phrase for 3 months. Said the Kurd is making religion an instrument of politics. I say, swearing by all that is sacred, that even if I had 1,000 politics, I am sacrificing it for the truths of Iman. How can I ever make the truths of Iman an instrument of politics? Even though I have disproved this accusation in 100 places, they present it again by repeating in chorus the same old thing. This demonstrates they are deliberately trying to indict me at every opportunity. So I am accusing the atheist tyrants that are against us of making politics an instrument of atheism. In order not to reveal how they use this terrifying accusation, they are constantly bringing up the sentence, Said is making religion an instrument of politics, as a cover. Since this is the case, and they are trying to sentence me no matter what, I say this to the worldly: for 1 or 2 years of life in this old age, I will not lower myself to such unnecessary debasement. The 5th principle, it is 4 points. The first point: the words of the indictment are being manipulated, despite there being no such intended meaning in the use of the actual word. They are extracting meaning by implication. The purpose of the Risale-i Nur is completely different. If the implicit meanings of its words do not match the intended meaning, or even if the explicit meanings of its words do not match the intended meanings, they are still worthy of forgiveness and leniency. The following example, which explains this point, can be used as a measure. For example, I am running on my path towards achieving my goal. While running, if I was to bump into a large man unintentionally and that man fell down, and if I said, "Sir, forgive me, I was running towards my goal, I bumped into you unintentionally," he will surely forgive and not be offended. If I deliberately poked one of my fingers in his ear to annoy him, he would consider that an insult and would take offense. Since the goal of the Risale-i Nur is Iman and the hereafter, if along the journey of its thought and knowledge, it happened to bump into the politics of the worldly and potent words were found in it, it is still worthy of forgiveness and leniency. Our objective is not to interfere with you. We are on our way to achieve our goal. I have been subjected to an injustice, the likes of which has never been seen. It is like this. With my final defense and 3 of my petitions, I have proven in 20 ways that Article 163 does not apply to me. Throughout the 120 of my works written over 20 years, only a limited number of points which amounted to less than 20 words were considered objectionable. As a member of the Darul Hükmetul Islamiyya, I had written true and scholarly defenses which are valuable, beneficial works relating to the hereafter across different times against the disbelieving atheist students of European philosophers. From among 100,000 words, it is requested that I be sentenced due to only 10 or 15 contravening certain parts of the civil law, which was enacted due to the prevailing conditions of the time and implemented long after these were written. Also, the copies of the Risale-i Nur in circulation, with its 120 parts consisting of important spiritual discoveries, have been seized. Without showing cause and without any legal basis, the courts have rejected all my scholarly, logical, and legal claims and defenses. There must surely be some commentary to the endless scope of this Article 163 of the law, which purports to include anybody provoking religious sentiments that could threaten public order. It should definitely have limiting conditions. Otherwise, just as this wide scope will sentence me, it will also include all the people of religion, and foremost the head of the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and be applied to all preachers and every imam. Because although I have presented more than 100 pages of my truthful and decisive defense, it is loaded with such meaning that I may fall within its scope. With its definition, it will capture anyone who is making a recommendation, even an advice given to encourage a friend to do good can fall within its scope of judgment. It is likely that the intended purpose of the law should be as follows: to prevent those who, under the veil of bigotry, try to subvert civilizational development by pursuing political opposition. According to this meaning, we have proved decisively that this article has nothing to do with us. This article of the law cannot be taken as having limitless implication, without commentary and any limiting conditions. It should not be open to the abuse of those malicious who can use it to strike at any person they wish. I have written 120 risales over 20 years, with 10 years of it under surveillance and supervision. After detailed investigation, not even a minor sign of disrupting public order was found about myself or those who read my Risales. And despite having proved in 20 ways, and all who know me closely testify that for 13 years I have fled from politics as though fleeing from the devil. I have never interfered with the government. I have suffered torments beyond human endurance and did not mingle with the world. For I have considered the service of Iman to be the greatest objective. They claim that Said is making religion an instrument of politics and is attempting to disrupt public order. To sentence me by trying to make me appear as violating Article 163 will, I believe, call upon the integrity of all the judiciary and courts on the face of the earth and draw attention to a legal case never before seen in history. The fact that world rulers and heroic commanders have knelt down even in the lowest of courts with complete conformity and displayed submission proves the existence of an unfaltering honor and integrity represented by the courts of law. Thus, I defend my rights freely, relying on this exalted and spiritual integrity of the courts. It is common practice to censor 4 or 5 words within an article that is deemed to be harmful and allow for the rest to be published. There are 120 books that have been written separately and across different times. The most important from the 115 innocent and beneficial Risales have been accepted with appreciation into the Ankara Library. To sentence all of these as a result of only 1 or 2 Risales that are imagined to be harmful according to the present view is a case that will impact the integrity of the judiciary all over the world. The appeals court will indeed preserve this honor and integrity. The following 2 matters have been the greatest targets of criticism and the most important among the 5 or 10 matters leading to all my books being rebuked. They are the ayats لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظِّ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ فَلِأُمِّهِ السُّدُوسِ. Among the 5 or 6 matters, the foremost reason behind the sentencing of my person and my books are these 2 matters. I have been writing not against the civilization that is true and beneficial, but rather against the defective and harmful civilization which I termed the uncivilized civilization. I have taken the foundations of the miraculousness of the Qur'an as my guiding principle for 30 to 40 years. I have discredited the opposing points of that civilization by proving its inadequacies and have thereby demonstrated the miraculousness of the Qur'an. I have written many published and unpublished books on this subject in Arabic and in Turkish. Some time ago, I had compared the present civilizational law regarding inheritance and the matters in them that were contrary to the 2 ayats of the Qur'an. I showed them evidences that would persuade even their most obstinate philosophers. I had written to defend these matters against civilization and the philosophers long before the government of the Republic had even enacted parts of certain civil laws according to the prevailing conditions of the time. I expressed in a most profound way that the all-wise Qur'an has protected the rights of women that had been lost in the classical and Middle Ages. Now I have been rebuked by Article 163, which states that my statements on these 2 matters are contrary to the laws of the government of the Republic. So I say this to the highest court of the judiciary. I am relying on a most sacred and truthful divine principle which has applied to the social lives of 350 million people every century for 1,350 years, and the confirmation of 350,000 tafsirs and their entire rulings. What I say is also in reverence to the spirits of all our ancestors. Therefore, how can it be justice to reach such a decision for my referring to the decrees of these two ayats to demonstrate the miraculousness of the Qur'an to the atheists of Europe, and to sentence me due to these prevailing conditions and put me into a prison which I am unable to endure due to my health? You have in a way wanted my execution and the sentencing of 115 of my Risales due to one or two matters like this. If there were such thing as justice in this world, it would reject this decision and overthrow this ruling. What amazes us and casts us into an endless despair is that in Sparta, mountains were made out of molehills. The decision reached relied heavily upon the baseless suspicions and reports that are false, since under no condition is it permissible to lie in our mazhab. Even if it is to my detriment, I am obliged to tell you the facts and the truth which I have presented in a 120-page defense. In response to the decision, I have provided powerful and logical evidences proving that we have no connection whatsoever with this article of law. Overlooking all my defense and evidence, they have confused the dates of the writing of the books with the dates of their corrections. They have attempted to show a 20-year work as being compiled in a single year. They even mixed up the dates which I had posted to a person in a modeling way. The decision reached by the interrogating judges and the indictment report of the public prosecutor, as well as the final decision of the court that tried us, the sentence has been made by entirely ignoring our defense. They played the same tune as the anxious ruling made by the Sparta courts. I categorically recused from this court, which is the highest level of the judiciary, that this injustice that is shaking the people of truth and reality be lifted at the earliest, and that it declare the innocence of the Risale-i Nur. If, assuming that this rightful and striking cry of mine is not heard and heeded, I will say in extreme despair, O atheist tyrants who have fabricated these events, subject me to suffer this calamity. Since you are so determined to execute me physically and spiritually in any way possible, why have you done so with intrigues and schemes at the hands of the judiciary? Why have you tainted the integrity of the judiciary in upholding the general rights of the oppressed and helpless? You should have confronted me directly head on and stood before me and said, we do not want you to lie in our world. Having given it an extremely superficial consideration in 1.5 days and without seeing the flaws and errors in the case, the criminal court postponed its decision on a matter for which the interrogating judges were engaged with for 4 months concerning the interrogation and investigation of 117 men. In particular, my scholarly defense regarding the important spiritual discoveries contained in the Risale-i Nur, which I claimed I would explain and prove before an academic committee, was overturned without any grounds or rebuttal. The failure, therefore, to be truthful and just due to these superficial treatments has led for this decision to be passed without due legal process and must therefore be overturned for further investigation. In conclusion, it can be seen from the documents of this hearing and especially from the careful examination and study of my published and unpublished Risales, which have been seized, that all my scholarly, logical, and legal objections and defense have not been considered in detail. Based on personal judgment and without any grounds, evidence, or legal reasoning, all my work has been openly ignored by the interrogating judges and the courts. All of my risales, which have unlocked the talisman of the universe, consisting of spiritual discoveries, and which are my 30-year defense of the rights of Turks and Islam against the philosophers of Europe and the dissolute parts of civilization, have been seized. I have also been sentenced with a physical punishment which I am unable to bear due to ill health. In consequence of the aforementioned reasons, I have submitted against the indictment my petition, together with the 5 principles listed in my second petition and my final defense in the last hearing of the court, which contain detailed explanations and scholarly and legal reasonings. In the absence of a legal application and conclusive investigation to arrive at such a decision, I expect the application of justice by the overturning of this verdict, which has clearly been given to me unjustly, saying, وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَصِيرٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. I seek refuge with Almighty Allah and rely on Him. I have read the previous 7 stages of my defense, consisting of 100 pages, over multiple hearings of the court. The following application to rectify the verdict, which has gone on the records of a number of court hearings, has not been read or put on record here, because our appeal papers have not yet arrived. It will indeed go on record in the near future. This is a petition written to the cabinet ministers to have our case rectified. If the Court of Appeal turns down our application and approves our sentence, the apparent complaints that are to be found here are complaints put forward to the government. They are criticisms about those scheming to deceive the government. O people of authority and resolve, I have been subjected to an injustice rarely seen on earth. Since to be silent at this injustice is to be disrespectful towards the truth, I am obliged to acknowledge an extremely important truth. I say that either deliver my execution and demonstrate my faults requiring 101 days in the legislation, or prove that I am completely mad. Otherwise, give my risales, my friends and myself our complete freedom and recover our losses and damages from those who have caused them. Note: in the event our case is accepted and is not refused to be heard by the appeals court, this petition is to be delivered to the cabinet ministers, the members of parliament, the interior minister, and also the Minister of Justice to review our case. If I am unable to make my rightful complaint and exercise my important right to be heard by these officials, it will be necessary for me to fare well this life, because with my silence I lose my personal rights as well as the rights of thousands of esteemed people. Each government has in place laws and processes. Sentences are given according to those laws. If no cause is shown to sentence us under the laws of the governments of the Republic, then it is indeed necessary that we are given our freedom together with an appreciation, compensation, and apology. For if my extremely important public service of the Qur'an was ever against the government, it cannot be charged with prison sentences like 1 year for myself and 6 months for my friends. Rather, it will need to be charged with something like 101 years or an execution for myself and the heaviest of sentences laid to those associated with my service. If our service is not against the government, let alone sentencing, imprisonment, or indictment, it will need to be welcomed with appreciation and reward. For this is such a service that 120 risales have become its translators, through which the great European philosophers have been challenged and their foundations shattered. For sure, such an effective service will either produce an extremely amazing result domestically or will yield a beneficial, lofty, and scholarly fruit. Otherwise, you cannot deliver me a prison sentence of 1 year so as to pull the wool over the eyes and mislead public opinion and cover up the intrigues and lies of the oppressors as though it is some kind of child's play. Anyone else in a similar situation would either walk to the gallows with his pride and be hanged or be freed at a worthy rank. A skillful thief able to steal diamonds worth thousands of dollars will not get into an act of stealing a glass worth 10 cents if the charge is equivalent to stealing diamonds. No thief, no person with intelligence would act in this way. Such a thief would be canny and would not fall to such foolishness. Sirs, let us suppose, as you suspect, that I was that thief, living in solitude for 9 years in a wretched village in the province of Sparta. Would I put myself and my risales, which are my life's goals, at any risk and danger by attempting to turn the opinions of 5 or 10 hapless people who are now with me and face light sentences and incite them against the government, while the whole time I could have occupied a high-level official post in Ankara or Istanbul and like all times turned thousands of people towards my intended purpose? Then I would have interfered with this world with a dignity suitable to my service and not with a wretched sentence such as this, without any intention of pride and boasting, but rather with obligation and humility, and to demonstrate their mistakes, I say the following to those who want to reduce me to a level of unimportance and irrelevance by recalling some of my former hypocritical states. Those who have seen my old defense, which has been published under the title The Testimonial of Two Schools of Misfortune, will confirm. For a man who, during the 31st of March incident, quelled the uprising of 8 battalions and brought them to order with a single declaration, who, as some newspapers had reported, performed important services during the War of Independence by turning the opinions of the scholars in Istanbul against the British with an article titled Hutuvat-ı Sitte, The 6 Steps, and rallied support for the national campaign, who made thousands listen to his declamation in Ayasofya, who, upon being ceremoniously welcomed by the applause of the members of parliament, persuaded them to allocate 150 banknotes for the establishment of a madrasa and university, with the signatures of 163 members of parliament, who retorted against the anger of the president in his chambers with complete fortitude, and without standing aside invited him to Salat, who, while in the Darul Hikmetul Islamiyya, was worthy to be nominated unanimously by the Union government for the role of effectively persuading the scholars of Europe on Islamic sciences, who had written in the battlefront Science of Miraculousness, Isharatul Ijaz, which is currently seized, and which was recognized by the Commander-in-Chief, Enver Pasha, so much so that with unprecedented, utmost respect, as a keepsake of that war, he raised to donate the paper needed for its publication to share in its honor. Note: the old Sayyid seeks permission to say, "You have not made me speak for 13 years, and now, since they are bringing me to attention and indicting you and are afraid of you, I surely must speak with them." Although egotism and selfishness is ugly, it becomes necessary to display egotism in the way of truth and to defend and protect oneself in the face of proud, obstinate, and egotistical people. That is why I cannot talk humbly and gently like the new Said. So I gave him permission to speak, but I do not agree with his egotism and praise. Would a man whose efforts are recalled with such appreciation ever get himself involved with a petty crime such as pickpocketing, horse thieving, or eloping a girl? Would he degrade his scholarly honor and the sacredness of his service, and thus humiliate his thousands of valuable friends, and be silenced so that you can sentence him with a 1-year imprisonment and have him treated like a petty thief? Now, after tormenting him under surveillance for 10 years without reason, together with imprisoning him, you say you want to keep him under supervision for another year. While he is unable to bear the tyranny of even the Sultan, you make him suffer torments under a malicious spy or an ordinary officer. For him, execution is a far better sentence. If such a man were to interfere with the world or desired it, and if his sacred service permitted it, he would have done so with 10 times the force of the uprisings of the Menemen event and Sheikh Said incident. The echoes of a cannon shot to be heard by the world would not have been reduced to the level of the buzzing of a fly. Yes, I would like to bring the attention of the government to how the secret society which have subjected me to this calamity show themselves by the measures they take and the propagandas they spread. The evidence that a widespread campaign of propaganda, intrigue, and terror is being waged against us in a way never before seen is this. Although I have 100,000 friends, not one of them was able to write me a letter or send me salam. Proof of this is the ongoing interrogations and investigations taking place everywhere, from the eastern provinces to the western provinces, due to the reports prepared by the schemers working to deceive the government. The plot devised by the schemers was that this would serve the heaviest penalties for thousands of people like myself. However, it has now resulted in a sentence similar to the pettiest crime of a most ordinary man. A sentence of 6 months was given to 15 of the 115 people. Could anyone in the world with any intelligence carry in his hands a diamond sword and simply annoy a terrifying lion or dragon by gently nudging its tail and making it chase after it? If his aim is to protect himself or fight against it, he would use the sword very differently. You have subjected me to this type of sentence and imprisonment because you have imagined me to be like this man. If I was acting against consciousness and intelligence that much, rather than instilling terror across the whole country through propaganda and turning public opinion against me, I should have been referred to a mental institute like an ordinary madman. But if I am fitting of the man which you deem to be so important, then surely I would never use that sharp sword to make the lion attack me and the dragon charge at me. I would instead be protecting myself against them as best as I can. Just as I have never interfered in any way, and neither have I desired to interfere in the affairs of the government, I have preferred this life of solitude for 10 years and endured torments beyond human resistance. It is my sacred service that prohibits me. O people of authority and resolve, is that all possible for a man who, as it was reported in the newspapers 20 years ago, turned 30,000 people to his view with one article, and who persuaded the immense military action force to take his opinion, who replied to the request of 600 words by the British Archbishop with 6 words, and who, like an accomplished diplomat, delivered a declamation during the early period of freedom, could it ever be that amongst the 120 Risales written by this man, that there only be these 15 lines which look to the world or politics? Could any intelligence ever accept that this man is pursuing politics and that his objective in this world is to interfere with the government? If interfering with politics and the government was part of his ideals, such a man would have made his motives felt in 100 places, in even one of his Risales. If this man's objective was political criticism, wouldn't you have found something more than the 1 or 2 principles which have been in force since former times regarding the weighing of women and inheritance? Surely a man pursuing political ideals who was in opposition to a regime which carried out such a grand revolution could have found not only these 1 or 2 matters, but hundreds and thousands of matters to criticize, as if the revolution of the government of the Republic relate to only 1 or 2 minor matters. Although they carry no intention of criticism, it has been said that my reference to these matters in my former books, by way of 1 or 2 words, amounts to carrying out attacks on the government's regime and revolution. So I ask you, how can you indict such a scholarly matter which does not even result in a sentence and contrive this case to engage and spread anxiety around the whole country? You have thus given me and 5 or 10 of my friends such an ordinary and insignificant sentence, and have allowed for the widespread propaganda across the country, turning public opinion against us through fear. The Interior Minister has personally come to Sparta to carry out the task of an ordinary soldier, and Prime Minister Ismet toward the eastern provinces for the same reason. You have silenced me from speaking to anybody in prison for 2 months, and have prevented the grounds for anyone to ask my well-being and send their salam. All of this demonstrates that this is completely contrary to purpose, wisdom, and the law. It is just like being fixated to a single fruit as small as a seed on an enormous tree, let alone a law-loving government of the Republic like this one that acts according to the law. Rather, no government on the face of the earth, which calls itself a government and governs with wisdom, will ever have any connection with such a matter. I am recusing my rights within the laws. I am accusing those who are acting illegally in the name of the law as criminals. I am hopeful that the laws of the government of the Republic will indeed reject the freedom of such criminals and will restore my rights. Held in the solitary confinement in Eskişehir prison, Said Nursi.